Okay, let's try this again. Welcome to Forking Off, the podcast for people who said no to just following orders, where we explore the very personal decisions behind leaving federal service, whether by choice or by force. Every departure has a story, and we're here to share them.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of Forking Off. I'm Jill Fields.
And I'm Philip Fields.
And today we have with us Kayla Staph. Hi, Kayla.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Great. We're so glad you could join us today. So, Kayla, why don't we go ahead and get started and give us your bluff, your bottom line up front.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. My name is Kayla Staph. I was a special agent with the FBI for nearly 5 years. I handled national security and criminal cyber cases as well as counterterrorism. And I took the second DRP, and my last official day with the FBI was September 30th.
You covered a lot of different things there. So, Kayla, how did you end up in public service?
Sure. Yeah, I can't talk about my journey in public service without talking a little bit about my family history and context. I had two grandfathers that served in the Army in World War II. I had a father that served in the military Army as well. And I grew up with parents that were educators in the public school system and just really built this foundation of loving people and caring for the community and loving without partiality or discrimination. So it was very natural for me to enter into public service myself. And I entered into teaching. Just like my parents, I became a high school math teacher. I've taught in multiple states, ranging in diverse educational settings. I coach volleyball, basketball, and track, and loved my time as a high school teacher. Loved coaching, and I took a little bit of time off to serve with a organization called International Justice Mission that seeks to protect people in poverty from violence. And so the field office I was a part of was combating human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking. And I was there for 10 months. And that was my first exposure, I guess, to working within like the justice system. No, it was not the American justice system, but this holistic approach of how do we serve the community and our country or what have you in a holistic way. So with community outreach, with engaging with victim specialists or with the social workers that would support survivors of human trafficking, the lawyers that are taking the cases to court and coordinating with local law enforcement and multi-agency cases. So it was just this beautiful experience of all these different facets coming together for the betterment of the community, and that justice wasn't just like getting the bad guys, that there was this broader and more holistic approach. And when I got back to the States, I went back to teaching, but I thought if I could ever serve my country in that capacity, I would take the opportunity. The opportunity presented itself through the FBI. I saw an ad, a recruitment ad for becoming a special agent with the Bureau, and I thought, why not? This is my opportunity to serve my country on the state side. And the rest is history with that. I joined the FBI in December 2020. I did have dreams of working on VCAC, so that's our Violent Crimes Against Children squads, or working human trafficking cases. The needs of the Bureau put me in cyber. That was really interesting. I barely knew what an IP address was. So for anyone out there in cyber, yes, that is where I started. And at the same time, so full of zeal, so excited to do this work. It would not have mattered what squad I was on. I was proud to be part of this organization. I love my time at the FBI. I love my coworkers. And despite my shaky, not knowing it much more than an IP address, I grew to enjoy cyber. I jumped into the deep end. I had great squad mates who walked alongside me, really pushed me. I nerded out with the Darknet diaries, took all the third-party trainings, the accelerated in-house trainings. It was never the same. It's always changing. And the cyber threat is pervasive with nation state actors, because I did do some national security, but then there's these criminal cyber cases with ransomware and business email compromises, and you're unmasking these identities of these cyber criminals, finding their true location. And it feels really rewarding when you finally see one of those cases come to an outcome, whether that's seeing the extradition of a cyber criminal to the US and being held accountable for their crimes, and victims being able to share their impact stories. Those are really rewarding moments that you're like, this is what we're here for. We're here for people that are victimized so that our communities can flourish. But also when it comes to national security, serving our broader purpose of protecting our country from these persistent threats. Yeah, and I worked a little bit of counterterrorism, kind of getting thrown in the deep end again, but also very fascinating, very rewarding work. By the time I left the Bureau, I was back on cyber and I'm really feeling like I was hitting my stride. Like I, had been in several years by that point, kind of knew, my style, I guess, in running cases and the collaboration with my squad mates, that cohesiveness. Something I forgot to mention earlier is just that collaboration with our attorney's office. Any of the collaboration I've had with an AUSA, it was a good partnership. So yeah, and I think anyone who's been in the Bureau would say they have their laundry list of things they would love to change about the Bureau and things that we could do better. But overall, the people that work there make it. Just incredible people, hardworking, passionate. It's an incredible place to be a part of, just that energy and that drive, working together for the same mission on behalf of our country.
I know Philip and I both agree. The FBI is a really special place. You don't always end up where you think you're going to end up, but the Bureau has a way of tossing you in the deep end and then saying, all right, you're going to swim. Here are your tools. Let's go.
I'm really excited to hear you say that you didn't know what an IP address when you started working cyber, because I think that's the way it is for a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of people recently about the expectations within the private sector for people going into cybersecurity. A lot of times they're very unrealistic about the experience that they want somebody to have, even for an entry-level job, or whether there's even this idea of an entry-level job within cybersecurity. What you just outlined is a perfect example of how people can be brought into cyber without any sort of background in it and learn it on the fly as they go and be successful.
Yeah, I had such a good relationship with that cyber squad coming in. They have so many jokes about me because of my lack of experience with cyber. And I don't know if people are just like, wow, she has all this background in math. They are two very separate things. It is like learning another language. It was quite the learning curve. But yeah, as you said, Philip, if the training's there and the drive is there and the support is there, getting someone up to speed is possible. And I used to joke that I asked a million questions because eventually the return on their investment would work out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's one of the things I loved about the FBI. As much as we're often critical about the training available in the FBI, turns out it's actually really good comparatively.
Yeah. And I think the stakes are high. So you've got to learn it fast and people are counting on you. The work that we do doesn't have the luxury of taking its time.
Yeah, failure is not an option.
Right. Something that I genuinely started to enjoy about cyber is that it touched all the other violations too. So anything that I was learning on how to unmask a cyber criminal, somewhere overseas could be applied to all the other violations, and actually got to support our VCAC squad in doing some of those things because direct application to unmasking where an actual person's location is when you don't have, traditional law enforcement techniques. They're sitting behind a computer. So how do you find them if they're leftover artifacts or mistakes that they're making too? So even then, like I remember, helping figure out where a subject was, and it was somewhere overseas and it had to do with a VCAT case. And I remember it being confirmed by one of my colleagues on the cyber squad. It was one of those one of those proud moments of, yeah, like you all taught me really well. And like, I can have confidence that I'm picking this up. So it's really cool stuff.
It is cool. So you had this cool job with the FBI, catching bad guys, disrupting nation state actors. What happened?
The stories I feel like we have they become similar, but all different. And so for me, I think the biggest thing that I've been trying to spread the word, but trying to tell people is it really is what we learn at the Bureau, the totality of the circumstances. You can't just look at one thing and necessarily make a judgment call over it. You have to bring in this totality. What is all the available information that you have? And given this context, what conclusion can you draw from all of this? I think even when we were talking, even before this show, we've talked about how we're not hired to be robots. We're hired for our good judgment. As I've tried to tell people, the lowest bar that we had was, is it legal and constitutional? But so if we're hired for our good judgment, that has to apply when not only is it constitutional and legal, but is this also the right thing to do? Is this the just thing to do in this moment, in this situation, with the totality of the circumstances? And then even if we decide that, how are we going to do that? What is the right way or the just way or the ethical way to do said activity? So is it right? And are we going to do it the right way? Those also apply. And that's where the good judgment comes in. So for me, the totality of the circumstances kind of actually began before January when I was considering what might the new administration do to the Bureau. There's been a history with this administration in the Bureau. So what could that mean for us? So I'm just thinking through like, what are the circumstances surrounding the new administration going in, and what decisions may I have to make as a member of the FBI if some of the things that are being discussed come true? So things like there's going to be mass deportations and we're going to use the FBI, DEA, and ATF. And I'm thinking to myself, that's an interesting choice because, as I mentioned, just the work that I did on cyber and the international counterterrorism, I'm like, we don't have time to divert anything from these initiatives. We have a cyber threat that is getting more sophisticated. Our IC3 numbers are only increasing in the amount of loss that we're losing every year. We can't be taken away from this stuff, but I'm still listening. Okay, so perhaps we could be doing that. But then they're saying it's going to be the worst of the worst. I'm like, well, traditionally, as law enforcement, we're always after the worst of the worst. So maybe that means the FBI will be brought in for some multi-agency across-the-board takedowns. That seems like that would make sense. I've been part of those. Operation Cookie Monster was an example of a cyber one that was all across the United States, even in several other countries. Maybe that's what they mean. But at the same time, factoring in, well, there's been a lot of dehumanization rhetoric towards the immigrant community. And we saw a lie about one of the immigrant communities in Ohio being said, and they experienced bomb threats as a result. And so weighing in what could happen. For me, a lot of it was as it relates to immigration. What is this going to mean for our organization? And so as I entered into the year, I just kind of had this moment of, all right, recommitment to why I joined this organization in the first place. I'm going to honor my oath that I took to the American people. I'm going to honor my own values and morals. And I have this statement at my desk that says, seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. And so I'm like, I will honor myself as well. Like not just the oath I took, but also myself. I need to be able to look myself in the mirror every day and still be able to say, I'm honoring my oath and I'm honoring the commitment to myself. And so as I've been asked, like, when did you know this was different? And it was day one, absolutely day one, January 20th. And there's sweeping pardons for January 6th defendants, even the ones convicted of violence, people who sprayed officers with bear spray and hit them with fire extinguishers and planned heinous acts of violence at our Capitol. Even though like there was kind of like this shock, because I don't think we were prepared for people convicted of felonies to be pardoned. There was a lot of discussion about all the people with misdemeanors, but I don't think anyone was prepared for. It just seemed foreshadowing, like there was a foreboding in the air. And January 31st, 11 days later, acting Attorney General Emil Bove had instructed there to be a list of anyone who participated in a January 6th case, not agents only. It included our professional staff, 6,000 people. We weren't sure yet what intent it was. There was whispers of there was going to be mass firings, everybody summarily dismissed, meaning there would be no due process for anybody. There was a complete role reversal where it was, we will acquit the guilty and condemn the innocent. That is not justice. That's not the way of justice. We're completely 180 twisting things. And that's happening inside the Bureau. It's us experiencing, kind of reeling from, are we about to lose 6,000 people? Along with, we're losing DOJ attorneys. And also there's this revisionist of this day where there was acts of violence being flip-flopped. You know, agents are getting doxxed and there's trending social media for the doxing of agents that were on these cases. It felt clear that something big was changing and it was taking off. So yeah, I don't know how it was for you all when some of those things started happening, but I think it just changed the shift in the nature of the work. So like before, going to work is energizing, we're doing our mission, fighting crime, we're doing all these important things. And all of a sudden it just felt like it flipped on a dime. Yeah, I don't know what it was like. And just those first few days for you all.
Yeah. And we knew there was going to be a big immigration push, especially because we're LA, we're in Southern California. We have a large immigrant population. We knew that was coming. And I'll say, like, it was a question every morning of what am I going to be asked to do today that I'm going to have to say no to.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was difficult. And Philip had he was on a different side of that than I was.
Yeah, Jill was a little closer to some of the immigration stuff. For me, it was a little bit different because I was sitting with a counterintelligence squad when the rumors started swirling about, well, we need lists of all of the potential subjects who don't have U.S. citizenship and we're going to start deporting people. There were a lot of questions swirling around, well, we can't deport this person. We can't even approach this person because then this foreign government, this terrorist organization, etc., is going to know we're onto them. We know their plans. We know what's going on. And so it was just this really wild concept. But in retrospect, those sort of early rumors and ideas are some of the least surprising things that have happened.
Yeah, that's the sad part is when I look back at what some of the things were happening at the very beginning, I'm like, wow, it's nothing to what's happening now. And it was concerning then. And so, yeah, for where I was and where I was located, yeah, immigration became something on the forefront immediately too. It was kind of like this, just like this gut punch. It's like while we're reeling from, are we about to lose like 6,000 people? There's also then this huge push for immigration, of which we have no training on. Like when we go to the FBI Academy and train, we do not get trained on Title 8 matters, which is all the immigration matters. Civil matters. We are trained on Title 18 matters, criminal, national security. It's not even on our radar. And so it was so much at one time. It was so hard to even think about what was even happening because everything was changing so fast. And so I know that across the Bureau, there were some big takedowns with ICE or ERO or whichever 3-letter agencies they were. And, a lot of media and such. But again, as I went into the year and thinking about that concept of the worst, I'm like, well, if statistics show that immigrants commit crimes at a less rate than citizens, I anticipate these takedowns, like we're going to do some, they're going to be over, and we're all going to move on because no one would be foolish enough to divert resources from the Bureau's work to work civil immigration matters. Worst of the worst, quote unquote, maybe. But no one would be foolish enough to take us away from some of the work that we're doing to help detain immigrants who've been here for years and have no criminal record. There was no concept for me because I know the work that we do and how important it is. And so I remember having those conversations with people in the office of, so where's our line? Where's the Bureau's line? No one could tell me where that line was going to be. It was stuff coming from the top, trickling down, which is not also how we work as an organization that's separate from the White House. We stay committed to our mission. Administrations come and go. We stay committed to what we are supposed to do when it comes to protecting the American people, separate from, like, we do not serve at the pleasure of the White House. We serve the American people and our mission stays the same. So it's this very clear distinction. Our initiatives do not change because of a change in administration. And so when all this is just getting pushed down and it appears to be getting pushed down from a White House initiative, that also just creates this cognitive dissonance of, I don't know how to process that because this isn't how we work. And so then when it's like, okay, well, where's our line? When are we backing out? Once everyone in our AOR with criminal records has been arrested, are we like, all right, we're done, we're getting back to what we do? And it just didn't seem to have an answer for that. I can remember when it came out that no, everyone will be taking part in ERO and we'll be doing a rotating basis. And also, this is going to be happening for the foreseeable future. And so then I'm like, okay, so we're going to go after people that aren't the worst of the worst now. That's the only next rational spot, or that's the only next thing that's possible, and then there's kind of the shrug of the shoulders. We're not really sure. We're just going to go with it. And I remember when someone came back and said there had been several arrests of undocumented immigrants, and the question raised, did they have any criminal records? And they were like, not to my knowledge. And there's just the audible gasp in the room because we're all like, what are we doing? And it's crazy because we're talking about this now, and this is probably March. I think the reports are out now that 25% of the Bureau's resources has been shifted to immigration, upwards of 40% in some of the biggest field offices. And that's unconscionable to me because it's not the worst of the worst as was portrayed or what was said. And I personally had to weigh that back to my morals, back to my values, back to my training and experience at Quantico when we talked about how have we gone wrong? How has law enforcement been used by those in power in government to act in ways that would justify violence against particular people groups? We have world history to look at. We have our own history to look at. And for me, the conclusion I made was that as I was seeing these initiatives take place, and as it was very clear that it wasn't the worst of the worst, that it's going to be anybody, that the net is going to continue to be cast wider and wider. And then HSI came out with like an initiative that we were going to do welfare checks for unaccompanied minors with the pretense of certain reasons why we're doing such things. But again, it was, how are we doing it? It didn't sound like we were going to use our least intrusive means. Victim specialists seem to be oddly not present. And then now again, everybody sign up for rotations with HSI for this initiative that sounds a lot like we're going with false pretenses, sounds a lot like we're not using the least intrusive means. And I think at this time, all outreach had stopped as well. And so what organization am I a part of anymore? What are we becoming? What are we doing to the communities that we serve? Do we actually think that we're going into these communities and people are like, yeah, they're here to protect us? Or are we going into these communities under certain pretenses, but in reality, it's just causing more fear and anxiety and panic and unjust fear and panic? By this time, and as I had looked back at what I was considering at the beginning of the year, as I saw Patel and Bongino, because at this time, Patel has been confirmed, Bongino is in, who was not an in-house agent and who may have left the Bureau by the time this recording is aired. I was looking at the trajectory of where they were leading the organization, where they were getting their orders from, which appeared to be the White House for immigration, mass deportations. And I just determined that they were leading us in a way that history has shown doesn't lead us to good places, that when powerful law enforcement agencies, especially like the FBI, the tools that we have, the resources that we have, like it is a huge responsibility to steward the FBI and its resources and its employees. And so if you're leading the FBI in such a way to essentially relinquish and acquiesce the power that we have to undermine justice, I can't be part of that. That is not a reflection of where my colleagues haven't left and that there are colleagues still there. And I have the deepest and most profound respect still for my colleagues that are still there. I love them dearly. I loved the work that we did together. I miss seeing them every day, but I also miss, I'm grieving something that doesn't exist anymore too, in some ways. The work has changed. The Bureau is changing. The agenda is changing, and how it's operating is changing. We've also seen, I remember when we lost 7 or so SACs, so Special Agent in Charge, and the majority of them were people of color or female or both. There's just all these things that kept happening within the Bureau that made you question then, there didn't appear to be any articulable reason, as we would say, opening cases, articulable facts for why those individuals were removed from their posts. But we're also hearing rumors about loyalty tests and polygraphs of higher level executives. And so who's getting put into the positions of power over these field offices? I had the privilege of still having, while I was there, leadership that was wrestling through these initiatives and communicating very well with us. But then some of those left and got targeted. And so there was just this sense of who's leading us right now? Do they have our back? Are they committed to the Constitution and the American people? Or are they also committed to an individual, which is not what we're about? And so it was more than just fearing what I would be asked to do next. Because like what the two of you said, walking into work wondering, am I going to be asked to do something that I find morally reprehensible today? Not just is it unconstitutional, that's a no-brainer. Will I be asked to do something that is deeply unethical or in a way that would break our policy? Because I feel like that's when I left, that was kind of like the lines that were starting to get blurred. And to me, I'm thinking, but our policy has a high standard because we have determined that that's what's ethical. That's just where I was. And so the second DRP came out in April. I had barely told anybody how I was feeling because a culture of fear had already been implemented. Everyone could be at risk for if you're pushing back or asking questions and you wasn't sure maybe who you could talk to. And so when I made the decision to leave, and it was still the hardest decision I've had to make in my professional career because I was going to leave behind a work that I loved, people that I cared deeply for, and still wrestling with, shouldn't I stick around to help? Lots of questions, but ultimately I couldn't be part of what was happening. And as I've wrestled through that, there were moments where I thought about if my nieces and nephews, I don't have children yet, but if I do have grandchildren one day, and they get to the age of being, in their early 20s, and they ask me, what did you do when you saw injustice just like sweeping across your country or our country? But like, what did you do in that moment? And I want to be able to give them an answer that they would be proud. I'm going to cry thinking about it. That they would be proud.
It is so emotional. And you did. You made a brave decision. You knew where your line was. You knew where your boundary was. And it wasn't the same decision that everyone else made, because everyone had to make their own decisions. Just like Philip took the first DRP and I tried to stick it out, and then I couldn't. And a lot of that was, am I going to be able to look myself in the mirror? Am I going to be able to look at my child and say, I stood up for what was right? I want you to know we stand up for what is right. Something you mentioned earlier, Kayla, when you go through FBI training, I know with my class, we went to the Holocaust Museum in DC, and we spent a day there. Going through the museum, we had actual Holocaust survivors as our docents who walked us through and led the discussions for the day. But at the end of the day, we sat in an auditorium and we talked about, how did this happen? And what can we do to make sure that never happens here? And I remember at the time thinking, well, that would never happen here. This is the US. This is America. People won't just blindly follow. And it's sad to say, I think I'm wrong. I was wrong.
Yeah. And I think we saw what was happening to people too, who were saying anything. I mean, even since I've left, there's been consistent summary dismissals of people. Like Driscoll's no longer there, who was the acting director at the time, who was really standing up for employees against that list. And I do remember asking one time, like, who's pushing back? Like, and they're like, who? They're getting fired. My gosh. It appeared that it was meant to cause a certain level of fear. And even in Driscoll's lawsuit, him and two other agents, their lawsuit against the Bureau, they talk about even back in January when they approach Acting Attorney General Emil Bove and say there's fear and panic in the ranks, or it's fear and anxiety. It's one of those. And the response is, that's the point. And I think in the time and in the midst of, those first several months of the new administration and being in the Bureau, you got the sense that there was something more than just these things coming out. But you don't want to be overly suspicious either. But then when you see it on paper, that conversation happened, that someone was trying to be like, hey, this is happening in the ranks. And the response is, yeah, that's the point. Kind of just like reveals a level of cruelty that I didn't know was possible at the upper positions of power within our government. And I think that that's with the immigration also. I didn't know that I would witness a level of cruelty against the immigrant population like I have seen.
Yeah, it's been very surprising. We've spoken with several people about immigration, and we spoke with an immigration judge as well. Everyone's just like, this is incomprehensible of what's going on, because this is a country made of immigrants.
Yeah.
That's what we are, who we are.
Yeah, I mean, you've covered so much. There were a few things that I did want to sort of comment on when you talked about early on, this idea that we were only going to go after the worst of the worst, and it didn't feel like that might be the case. If you saw, or for anybody who recently saw Michael Glisheen's testimony before Congress, we'll sort of set aside the sensational part of it. Alongside that testimony, an assessment was provided to Congress about the FBI's, view on worldwide threats. Antifa was not in that assessment, but there were some very important numbers that were in that assessment that directly contradict the idea of going after the worst of the worst. In the section where it talks about immigration enforcement, it says that since January 20th, the FBI has participated in over 37,000 immigration-related operations, resulting in over 38,000 arrests. Now, just by sheer volume, that doesn't seem like the worst of the worst, but if you're not convinced, they go on to say over 230 arrests of Tren de Aragua members and 120 arrests of MS-13 members. Now, I was not a high school math teacher, but 350 divided by 38,000 seems like a very small percentage of arrests that the FBI took part of while going after what was being described as the worst of the worst. That was incomprehensible, like you said. So when you were talking about when we steward the capabilities of the FBI, it's a really bad precedent to set. It's been 50 years since the church committee had their hearings, and there are a couple of quotes that have really stuck with me lately. And one was from Frank Church. It was along the lines of what you said earlier. He said, "If a dictator ever took charge in this country, the technological capacity that the intelligence community has given the government could enable it to impose total tyranny, and there would be no way to fight back." It's debatable whether or not we've reached that point, but it is not debatable that he is correct, that the ability to fight back seems totally absent right now. And that is very concerning. The other one that really sticks with me, when we talk about how do we look at our future generations, for us, how do we look at our son and tell him that we kept the faith? For me, there was another senator, Philip Hart. He made a statement during the committee. He had been telling his children, I think, that the FBI would never take part in the kinds of activities that they were saying it had been. They must be on drugs. That would never happen. And then sort of reflecting on all of the findings of the committee on everything that the Bureau had been doing along with the IC, that our responsibility now was to correct that action, but also to convince the country that it had happened, which I think right now there are a lot of people who don't even believe that this is going on. It's not just to convince them, it's to convince the rest of the country, and at this point the rest of the world, that we can somehow prevent it from ever happening again. How do we rebuild the trust that the FBI has squandered over the past year?
It's been stated with the DOJ at large and losing so many of the attorneys as well, that there's just been this brain drain from DOJ at large, including the FBI. People that are speaking out are saying it's going to take decades for us to restore and build something new again, because there's been so much devastation in one short year, actually not even a year. It's hard truth to sit with. I think when I left, I still was wondering, am I crazy? Am I overreacting? Maybe I have misinterpreted the direction. Although I will say I had multiple conversations. I even sought out legal counsel about what I was seeing ethically and, what could happen to me if I say no to something. What are the disciplinary actions, if I'm found insubordinate? Just having those really real conversations, because I'm like, I know where my line is going to be. So I just need to know, practically speaking, what happens if I say no here and what happens next, etc. And so I think I thought, to a degree, everything's going to be fine. I'm making this decision, but it's all going to be fine. I remember when it was days before my last day in the office, and 3 more executive management got forced out or fired or what have you. And one of them being somebody who got forced out based off of just a friendship with somebody that was deemed to be disliked by the administration. I was like, okay, maybe it's getting worse and it's going to continue to get worse. And then it has.
I recently had coffee with a former colleague, and they mentioned that every Friday there's an email that comes out and tells who's being summarily dismissed this week. They said, and the execs are just saying, we can't say no to anything. We have to do it. Otherwise, we're going to be on the dismissal list and I can't lose my job. And it's like, excuse me? Like,
yeah, I think like that's where not only is there kind of like a brain drain happening, like I'm seeing just like this loss of integrity. Our motto, fidelity, bravery, and integrity. Like we're seeing why integrity it's necessary for the other two. Like you can't be quote unquote brave or strong without integrity and wisdom. Because if you do not have integrity and wisdom to go with that bravery and courage, you're going to see recklessness and lawlessness. It has to be there. As it starts to disintegrate, that's when we see more unlawful dismissals, more recklessness, incompetence to grow. I just want to make a case for integrity needs to come back. We need a high expectation of integrity.
And for me, I think early on, that was the big thing. It was the writing on the wall, as they say.
or the writing not on the wall that was painted over.
That's where I was actually going with this. Yes. They didn't just paint over it at Quantico. They removed the FBI's core values in their entirety, and integrity was one of those. That was a very good sign that this wasn't just about one thing, that this was about reforming the entire concept of what was moral and ethical and shifting the organization in the wrong direction. But yeah, very disappointing to see, especially at the upper levels, the executives who have made those statements and those decisions. And we heard them in our office too, coming down. Well, we have to do this because so-and-so's job is on the line and I don't want to get fired. And I'll just say it, that is selfish. You're not getting fired from Google or Amazon where the only outcome is the loss of a paycheck. By staying, not everybody who stays is making this decision, but when that is your motivator, I have to do this immoral, irreprehensible act because of a paycheck, you're making a decision to endanger the people who you took an oath to protect. And you are actively destroying the Constitution that you took an oath to uphold. That's a hard no for me.
You're right. It's just like when I told them no and they were like, you can get fired today or in 4 years. And I'm like, fire me today.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do the wrong thing.
Yeah. And it's disheartening because I think like you were saying, Philip, even just like it's this upper leadership that's now been put into place. Because I think I was telling somebody, it's also important that I know that my leadership cares about me. That has to be somewhere in their leadership that I think that they actually care about people. And the fact that it's more about just following the initiative, or it appears to be following the initiative of the White House versus the commitment that we all made to the Constitution and the American people, and then exposing the rest of the workforce to that. That's the effect of leadership without integrity. And it does show, when Driscoll and the other two got fired or summarily dismissed, Driscoll was fighting for people and saying he wasn't going to do things, or according to his affidavit or the lawsuit and what we heard about in January. And yeah, it did get him fired, or it seems to be that this is what caused him to get fired. And so, yeah, we need people to be able to say, like, especially in those upper leadership positions, like, I will stand by what is right and stand up for my people, basically be the gap between really bad initiatives that are unjust and the rest of the workforce.
Absolutely. So, Kayla, is there anything that would have changed your decision?
No. Yeah. So it's like, what would have had to have changed for make me to stay? And everything, all of it. Yeah, literally everything. There was a fundamental change in the Bureau. I feel like in some ways, if we use the relationship analogy, I entered the relationship holding my end of the bargain. Like I did what I said I would do as my oath entering the relationship. It was the Bureau that changed. Therefore, I made the conclusion that, well, you have gone back on what you said you were going to do. So at this point, we can no longer co-labor together in this world.
It's not me, it's you.
It's not me, it's you. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Hilarious.
So Kayla, what have you been doing since you left? Like what's next for you?
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot since I left, not going to the office. Of course, my official date until September. So I had most of June, July. One of my things that I really wanted to do was participate in the World Police and Fire Games because the FBI can participate in that. And it was in the States this year. So I got to do that because I still held my title. That was a lot of fun. I've been connecting a lot with family and friends. I mean, when we join the Bureau, we give up a lot of our lives to do this work. And that means relationships are kind of put on hold and we don't have as much time to keep those connections. And so reconnecting with friends and loved ones, I've definitely been doing my fair share of grieving the loss of the job. Obviously, there's the loss of the income, but that's the loss of community. It's the loss of friends. It's the loss of this sense of purpose. It's a loss of dreams that I had for my future and what I wanted to do with this job, what kind of impact I thought I would be able to make. Not necessarily like I'd have this huge case and my name would be out there, but just knowing that you were a part of something bigger for the good of your neighbor and for our country. So grieving all the loss of that, then starting to also find my voice, as you two have done. Because again, when I left, I was like, maybe I might be the crazy one. Yeah. So how do I find my voice in the midst with all the chorus that I'm hearing out there of former civil servants who are raising the alarm, sharing their story, trying to communicate to the American people what has happened, what is happening, just strengthening that there's more of us now that are able to talk. So how can I participate in being a voice in that? So I got to write for the Justice Connection, which was a privilege to be able to have a guest post on their Substack. Got to write a little bit about what we were talking about in January with thinking everyone would get fired, highlighting where there have been moments of integrity, because it's one of the things that I feel I need to be talking about personally is part of rebuilding one day is making sure that we have a high value of integrity, that it can't just be whatever version of bravery and courage and strength there is right now, but something that's paired with integrity. So yeah, being able to do that. I've been reading a ton. I am an avid reader. So I'm consuming books. I've always had a hobby of writing. So I'm actually investing into my writing. I've bought a couple of books and practicing writing techniques. I also took my first generative AI training course, finished that, hope to get a certification there to add to my cyber certifications that I have through SANS. In that thread of like finding my voice, I have been able to have deeper conversations with people because, as you all know, we don't really get to have an opinion when you're in the Bureau. So it's very interesting trying to communicate what I see is happening, also what my opinion is, what my assessment is, and communicating that. And I will say part of that has been really tough for me. I didn't expect some of the reactions that I have gotten or the pushback that I have gotten. And there's been grieving there too. Figuring out where it is okay to share and where in some ways I'm not going to get, I don't know if you all are familiar with the acronym DARVO, deny, accuse, reverse, victim, offender. Where I'm at now is that I have determined I want to be part of the solution. I want to use my voice. I want to help in that initiative, but also I've come to the conclusion that I don't need to try to convince people there's a fire if they don't want to see it, that I need to help people who are suffering from it, that how can I provide care and triage to those who are being impacted versus trying to convince people that don't want to see it. So that's kind of that's what I've been doing since, a lot of self-reflection and applying to a lot of jobs.
All right.
I will say that even as another former FBI employee, the writing that you did for Justice Connection was very impactful. I was a little bitter after Driscoll said that the list wouldn't go out, and then it did, but with the anonymized numbers or whatever. But the way that you framed it really helped me see that in a new light, especially knowing about, the threat of releasing it publicly. I was looking at it thinking, well, DHS knows which names go with which numbers. That doesn't mean a thing. But when you talk about putting it on the internet, that's a very important piece of context for the public and for other employees to know. And I greatly appreciated what you wrote. It meant a lot to me, and I think that you are having an impact.
Thank you. In addition to what I have been doing, I'm also looking to continue. I would love to be an investigator again. And so I am looking into companies who provide security in the cyberspace or an OSINT investigator, or I have gained a lot of skills with the FBI to help people. And as the shift in resources are being pushed towards immigration, there is a gap that's being created with our national security. I can speak very confidently about a growing gap in our cyber security. Even again, we don't even have one day to take away from that threat. So there's going to be a gap. So how can I participate? So I would definitely love to join companies that are on that front, being able to apply my skills and still protecting and serving my community through the work of justice. Just may look a little different. And then thinking years ahead about, possibly going back to school, thinking about getting trained in like narrative focused trauma care, because assuming we have a functioning justice system or a functioning democracy in the future, I think that there are going to be more stories of harm that have happened as a result of the things that we're even seeing right now. And so how do we not only rebuild in the way of like our justice system, which is what I am passionate about, but also just our communities and the stories that will come out of that. So that's what I'm looking forward to and hoping for to do in the meantime with just some of the skills that I have right now.
That's awesome. So, final question. Would you ever go back?
There'd have to be so much change to go back. There would have to be so much change. The people make it. There's still people there that I would gladly work with. Again, we go out on dangerous things and I would gladly still, be right beside them in those moments and on those operations. And I forgot to even mention earlier that I was part of the crisis negotiation team as a negotiator, and I did evidence response team. And those teams are also, you build a closeness with, negotiating through the night with somebody. And you have these memories and these stories with one another that I would so cherish the day to be able to work alongside of these incredible individuals again. But like I said, the relationship changed with the organization as a whole, and the organization would have to change in some pretty drastic ways for me to be able to go back. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being candid about that.
Yeah.
It's not an easy question. People are like, oh, it's just a yes or no. And it's like, no, it's really not. It's so nuanced. I mean, the Bureau would be very fortunate to have you back, but it's not the same place. And it would have to go through a lot of changes. I know. Well, Kayla, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we sign off?
Yes. Okay. I'm very thankful for people like you two, this podcast, people that are taking the initiative to share the stories of today and what is happening. And so I just want to say to others who are out there who may be still feeling that they are alone in this, that there are others out there. You're not crazy. Things are bad. And there is a lot of, destruction that is happening right now. But I also think there's a lot of us that still deeply care about the work we were doing, and we're figuring out ways to use that passion and skill set to still serve our country, love people. That's one of the things for me is, as for me, I'm going to continue to find ways to serve and to care for people. So if we can continue to build on each other, support one another, I think that there's still hope. It's just, we have to be honest about where we're at right now and also dream about what could be if we come together.
I think that's big, to have the hope and know that we can rebuild and it's possible.
Yeah.
Well, Kayla, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for forking off with us.
Thank you too, and it has been a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Forking Off. To our listeners still in government, remember, your integrity is worth more than your TSP. Leaving doesn't mean giving up on public service. It just means finding new ways to serve.
Until next time,
keep your ethics,
keep your dignity,
and we'll keep telling these stories.
If you're a former Fed with a story to tell,
or you're wrestling with your own ethical crossroads, reach out to us at info@forkingoff.com.
Today's episode was created, produced, and edited by Jill and Philip Fields. Special thanks to our guest, Kayla Staph. You can find more information about this episode at forkingoff.com. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, Mastodon, LinkedIn, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Join us Monday, January 19th.
As we share our stories of why we left the FBI. I'm Philip Fields, and I replied resign.
Philip, you said something that just started putting everything into perspective. You asked me, can you come up with a reason to stay that doesn't sound like a battered spouse? And I mean, what a punch in the gut.
That morning, walked into the executive wing. This is the same place that more recently Senator Alex Padilla was tackled and placed in handcuffs for having the audacity to ask a question of Kristi Noem during a press conference.
They were getting really close to my line in the sand, and I was told I couldn't say no. I was also told I could go ahead and get fired today, or I'd get fired in 4 years.
And that was pretty much it. I knew right then I made the right choice.
Here's the thing. People knew that I had said no, and people came to me privately to basically pat me on the back and say, but you were so right, and I'm so glad, and I wish more people were like you. Well, you know what? Be like me. Push back, because saying no, it's not saying no. It's saying yes. It's saying yes to doing the right thing. It's saying yes to upholding your oath, to uphold the Constitution, to protect the American people.
I had decided I need to do this. I need to reply resign. Every day since February 12th has confirmed to me that I made the right decision.